You have divergence in values, divergence in interests. The partnership has not been renegotiated over the post-Berlin Wall era. And that, I think, has caused the lingering resentments that are now burst out into the open. The American right, over time, is a much more secure guarantee for Europe than the American left, but not if they are offered the same old deal, because the same old deal is a bad deal for modern America. America is not going to take Greenland by force. But what America is not willing to do any longer is let the Arctic defense remain a massive gap for China and Russia to exploit, which is what it is right now.
Hello again, my name is Justin Stairs. This is the Brussels Signal Studio, and we're here with our guest, Henry Olsen. Thanks, Henry, for finding some time to come into the studio.
Well, thank you for having me here.
Henry is Senior Fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center in Washington, D.C. He is also a Brussels Signal columnist, and we're here today to talk about the relationship between the U.S. and Europe. And the question in particular is, are the two blocs headed for a divorce?
Well, you'd have to say that it's likelier than not, that there's a clear discord in values. There's clear resentments on both sides that have been building up over time. And President Trump's less than diplomatic expression of some of those resentments from the American side has predictably created anger and triggered the resentments on the European side. It's not certain. There's certainly a lot of interest and a certain level of shared values that means that the partnership can continue. But feelings are feelings. They're hard and raw on both sides. And the fact is, the partnership needs to change because the circumstances that created it no longer pertain. And if you can't have a partnership that fits for the current times, the partnership ultimately will fade away. And it'll probably fade away faster rather than sooner if those hard conversations are not had.
Now, you say the situation has changed. What are you referring to specifically?
What I'm referring to is the Transatlantic Partnership is the creation of the post-World War II era. It is a specific consciousness by the European powers that they need continued American involvement to resist Soviet expansion. And it is a recognition by America that traditionally disdained old Europe, as it is said throughout American history, and entanglement in foreign alliances and in conflict, that the circumstances of the mid-20th century meant that had to change for America's sake. So the two found common interest, and they shared common values of liberal democracy. And the thing is, the Soviet Union's been gone for 30-something years. The current threat to global stability is not emanating from Moscow, but it's emanating from Beijing, and that threatens the Americans much more directly than it threatens Europe, for the obvious reason that you're half a globe away, and we're not. And so consequently, the unity of interest no longer pertains, and our democracies and our societies have evolved in different ways. We shared a similar level of liberal Christian values in 1949, and America has retained much more of that 1949 sensibility than continental Europe. And so consequently, you have divergence in values, divergence in interests. The partnership has not been renegotiated over the post-Berlin Wall era. And that, I think, has caused the lingering resentments that are now burst out into the open.
Okay, now a couple of points there. I mean, firstly, you mentioned obviously there was the Soviet threat, which was common to both Europe and the US. There are several countries in Europe who would say that Moscow is, in fact, a renewed threat today. So little has changed as far as that is concerned. But I guess what you mean is for the US,
yes,
Moscow is no longer seen as threat number one.
Correct. Moscow is no longer seen as threat number one, precisely because in 1949, Moscow was the center of the economic world that was opposed to liberal democracy. It had global ambitions and reached for a global scope. So for the United States, NATO was just part of an American strategy that included the now defunct CENTO and CETO treaties that were meant to contain all the borders of the Soviet Union to prevent
Right, in
expansion.
Asia, you're talking.
CETO is in Asia and CENTO is in Central Asia. It expanded from Iraq to Pakistan. So for America, the transatlantic relationship was primary because of the primary importance of Western Europe and its economy to the global balance of power. But we had global interests in ways that Europe even then did not have global interests. Today, the Americans look and they say, the only power that can threaten us is the Chinese because of its size and because of its development. Russia is an annoyance. Russia is a regional power with global ambitions, and it, of course, has nuclear weapons. But the threat to America and the global world order comes from Beijing in the American perspective, not from Moscow, which is why Americans look at this and says, Russia is a problem, but it is a regional problem. You, Europe, are 3 times as large as it, 10 times as rich as it. You can contain this largely on your own. And that's been the American perspective for quite some time, and Trump has made it American policy.
Right, and the other point you mentioned was the growing differences in values, and you touched on religion.
Yeah.
Can you go into that a bit more?
Yeah, well, so let's go back to the world of 1949. The world of 1949 is one where most people in Western Europe, most people in the United States profess Christianity as their religion. Many of those people are active participants. You know, you have active, vibrant, faith-based Christian democratic parties in much of Europe. You have an active religious element in the United States. Fast forward to today, there are very few countries where more than 15% in Western Europe attend some sort of religious service on a regular basis, and large numbers of people who do not profess Christianity at all or profess another religion. The United States has seen similar trends, but remains much more religious. It is, you know, in European perspectives, America is slightly more religious than Poland, which is, I think, the most religious in terms of profession and regular practice of any of the EU countries. And so you take a look at that and say America is still much more like 1949 than Europe. And what does that mean? It means it has this whole panoply of expansion into how religious speech is treated, how sexuality is discussed and treated. Is that in the United States there's still a widespread anti-abortion movement. There's, again, outside of Poland and perhaps some lingering feelings in Italy, there's virtually no anti-abortion movement in Western or in Eastern Europe. And so that means when, say in Britain, a anti-abortion protester is arrested for engaging in silent, non-violent, non-action protests outside of an abortion clinic. In America, where 35% of Americans are very anti-abortion and up to 50 to 60% are against abortion in late term, that's considered an outrage. And here it's considered a non-issue. And so these are the sorts of issues that come up again and again and again. And the thing Europeans have to understand is that the Republican Party is now a party that is not dominated by transatlanticists who are from a business-first perspective. They are dominated by American nativists who are from a church-based perspective. And so if you want to have an alliance with America, you have to have an alliance with all parties of America, much as America had to have an alliance with Europe that kept the alliance firm when a center-left party in the Soviet era would come to power. That's the way Europe has to look. And the question is, do you want to have an alliance with all of America? Or you just want to have an alliance with the elements of American society that want America to look more like Europe. If you want the latter, you cannot have an alliance with America because that wing will not win American elections with consistency.
Okay, now, as you've just explained it, this is a trend, in fact, that predates Trump, correct?
Oh, very much so, very much so.
Because this has come as a bit of a shock to many people on this side of the pond, and I think it's fair to say that at least in military terms now, there is a certain amount of panic in European capitals because it has become abundantly clear even this year or since late last year that Europe is or will be or could be on its own as far as containing Russia is concerned. And perhaps this is Europe's fault. I'm not trying to apportion blame, but we have a situation now where the majority of European armies are considerably depleted compared to where we were even 30 years ago, and therefore not really up to the job.
Right.
This is, I think that's fair, isn't it? So we have a certain amount of pleading going on now from Europe towards Washington. Please don't leave us alone quite yet, because let's face it, building up an army takes a while.
Yeah. Yeah, well, this is why I think the relationship metaphor fits here, is that how many relationships break down where the party who gets sent with the ultimatum literally has not seen the signs. Remember, this is a situation where President Obama's defense secretary came to the Munich Security Conference in 2011 and said, if you don't increase your military spending, America will find it hard to justify continued defense of Europe.
2011.
2011. Obama's defense secretary. Nothing happened. President Trump comes in, threatens, removal of Article 5, basically says to Angela Merkel, don't become reliant on Russia for energy and build your military. And what he gets shown is the bird in an American parlance. And not politely. That's another thing, is that you have to understand the American right is European elite condescension is very much understood. The idea that these are the country bumpkins who maybe we have to rely on, but we would never invite them through the front door. Okay, well, you want to invite us through the front door, maybe we'll let Russia in through the back, because why should we defend you people? And this is the sort of views you hear in the Signal correspondence that's been leaked from Vice President Vance. Well,
the freeloaders.
Well, that's the polite term. When I defend the Transatlantic Alliance on X and say, look, we need to rethink, Europe needs to do this, I get plenty of people from the MAGA world who says, what sort of fantasy world are you living in, Henry? They don't want to. This is not in our interest. They're just losers. This is sunk into a large segment of American society. And again, what you have to understand is in Europe, the populist element remains in check largely, which is to say that a quarter, a third, a sixth of the population, but because of your proportional representation system, they punch way below their weight in domestic politics. In the United States, because of our majoritarian system, effectively 1/3 of American society dominates one of the two major political parties. And then when presented with a binary choice, the American version of the traditional center-right holds its nose and votes for the populist right. You cannot expect that to change. It will not change. You will not have a situation in the foreseeable future where the Republican Party is represented by the traditional right and the Democratic Party is represented by transatlanticists. That will not happen.
Well, that's a pretty grim outlook for Europeans because, let's face it, the chances of war with Russia, who knows? It's obviously impossible to predict, but the probability is a lot higher today than it was before the invasion of Ukraine, for example. And Europe is now without, as I said, the military to stop Russia. So what would happen? Would the US simply look the other way, for example, if Russia marched into one of the Baltic countries, do you think?
Oh, yeah, this is one of the things that President Trump has a non-diplomatic negotiating style. Ronald Reagan frequently wrote that his ability to engage in international diplomacy was formed by his negotiating as head of the Screen Actors Guild. He said Mikhail Gorbachev.
I didn't know that.
Mikhail Gorbachev was basically a pussycat compared to Jack Warner, the head of the Movie Producers Guild. But what he learned from that was give and take. how to frame and discuss a negotiation and understanding that it's not a zero-sum game. Donald Trump was real estate. He had individual discrete deals. He did not have ongoing relationships. He learned different negotiating tactics. And for him, he has, putting myself in as best I can, a Trump psychology. He came in the first term, basically said, okay, Europeans have to shape up. Europeans have to build a military that's capable of defending itself. It needs to stop relying on American trade surpluses with America to prop up their economies. And he got the back of his hand. Basically, a little bit of military spending was touted into much more than it really was, and nothing serious happened in terms of trade. So he's tried being Mr. Nice Guy. And now it's time to basically be Mr. Crazy. And maybe Mr. Crazy can get what Mr. Nice Guy couldn't get. It's all negotiating.
Okay.
But negotiating is only legitimate when the threat is real, which is say, yes, if Europe does not present a credible deal, a credible, not just words, path to providing most of its own conventional defense backed up by money and specific plans, I think Trump very much would say, why should we defend Lithuania when Germany can't even fulfill its commitment to send a brigade?
Right.
And tell me, as much as I love the transatlantic relationship, tell me why America shouldn't make that deal.
Okay. Now, of course, I think we've moved even past that point, haven't we, to the situation where some are wondering if Europe will need to defend itself from the US. I mean, I'm referring to Greenland in particular. As you know, there are these. I've heard J.D. Vance talk in a way that would suggest that the US has territorial ambitions. I mean, this may be just a negotiating tactic, as you say, but President Macron of France has offered to station French troops in Greenland. Denmark turned down that offer, but I mean, these are plans that could conceivably lead to some kind of very cold military confrontation. I mean, have we got that far? It's not just about divorce. It's about what's worse than divorce?
Well, this is where the partner throws knives and plates at the other person.
Right, there you go.
So there is no American public polls show there is no significant support for Greenland becoming a state. I think there would be even less support for a military invasion. Yes, Trump has held that out there, but there are bridges too far. And I do not think that an order to invade Greenland, absent, the Danes have one old outmoded patrol boat guarding the entire Greenland area. I terribly doubt, this isn't even the Icelandic-British Cod War of 1975. There's no chance that there's anything that the Danes will accidentally shoot on an American vessel. There's no support. It's just impossible for me to see that Donald Trump could give the order, okay, we're going to take Nook tomorrow, and that the military would say, yes, sir. And there's no chance that the Congress or American public opinion would support that. There's no casus belli. There's no accident waiting to happen. So no, America is not going to take Greenland by force. But what America is not willing to do any longer is let the Arctic defense remain a massive gap for China and Russia to exploit, which is what it is right now.
Okay. Because obviously, given the, I think, as you put it, undiplomatic negotiating stance of Trump, and that's putting it mildly, there is obviously the danger that the US administration, will lose support from natural allies in Europe. I'm talking about the European right, who were ecstatic that he was re-elected. Surely this is not in the U.S. interest.
Depends what you think the U.S. interest is. I happen to think it is not in the U.S. interest. I think that America and Europe need each other, but the idea that the status quo of even 2023 is sufficient. I mean, soon to be ex-Chancellor Scholz promised a Zeitenwende, and we've seen 3 years of the Zeitenwende and seen very little Wende and a whole lot of Zeit pass by. And Americans notice this. It's like if you can't even arm when you say your own, when the little states in Europe are arming, but the big states don't see Russian invasion of Poland or the Baltics as a clear enough and present danger to significantly change their force posture. Maybe it's not in the interest. Again, America has a global military, but in the height of the Cold War in the 1980s, America was spending 6% of GDP on defense, and it had what was called a 2.5 war strategy, that America could support 2 major conflicts and a regional conflict simultaneously. For the last decade, America's force posture has been based on a 1 war strategy. If America can only fight 1 war at a time, it's darn well going to keep that capacity to fight China, not Russia.
Okay. So this is also a factor of the U.S., the reduced size of the U.S. hegemon.
With the reduced size of the U.S. military, this is the interesting thing being an American. If I say America has an empire or American has a hegemony, oh no, we're just this peaceful power. We love peace, rules-based order. No, America, even among the foreign policy elite, will not acknowledge the actual role that America has in the world, which is why Americans and Europeans will talk past each other. Europeans, for reasons of pride, won't want to explicitly talk about the American role. Americans are willfully blind about the American role.
Okay.
So we talk about the alliance and this value of partnership. We mean 2 different things.
Okay.
And we don't acknowledge the elephant in the room, which is American hegemonic power and the way America uses its position militarily and America uses its position economically to advance American interest, which Americans tend to see as global interest.
Right.
And other countries say, well, actually, it's more tilted towards you.
Right.
But it's simply it is simply to use, if Voldemort is he who must not be named, hegemony is that which must not be named in the United States.
Right, okay.
But America only spends 3.3% on national defense. Much of American military equipment was bought in the 80s, 90s, and early aughts. It is aging out. America needs to replenish its own defense. And America, let's put it another way. As we speak, America is sending a second carrier to the Red Sea. America has 11 carriers, more than any other country, almost more than the rest of the world combined. American carriers are bigger, they're more technologically proficient. 3 or 4 of them are under maintenance at any one time. Let's say 3. There are 8 carriers that are active. 3 are stationed in the Atlantic. The rest are stationed in the Pacific. How are we going to fight a Chinese blockade in China if 2 of the 5 are fighting Iran? We have a 1 war system.
Understood.
And this is what America has become built up as such this mighty power that the limitations to American power are not fully understood.
Right. Okay. 2 other subjects I want to raise. And one of them is how, therefore, if you had to give advice to the European diplomats here on how to handle Trump in order to make the best of a bad deal, let's say, what kind of advice would you give?
My argument is that what Trump has done is inartfully and perhaps not with the best idea of what is in long-term American interest, presented you with a good deal, which is you have to understand that power is relative, that when we had the Soviet Union, we needed Europe to spend 3% of its GDP, and they did. Britain spent like 4% of its GDP. It had a real military. France had a real military that could deploy overseas. Germany spent 3% of its GDP and had a real Bundeswehr that could defend West German territory. We need that again. We need that again because China's economy is growing quickly. China has the largest navy in the world. As we speak, it is growing by leaps and bounds. We have to defend the Pacific. We have to shift American air and naval forces away to defend against the Chinese. Power is relative. You need to increase your power. And that's the deal that Trump has essentially put. So what should you do? What I would do is I would say you need to present a real credible plan in time for the NATO summit on June 24th. You need to say, this is not words. Here is what we will do. Here is the time frame. Here is the force capacity at the end of it. Here is the budgetary mechanisms. Here is the plan. And in exchange, what we need from you is a commitment to Article 5, understanding that if we don't follow through on this plan, you will likely withdraw. But we finally have heard you, Mr. President. And we are finally doing what you have always asked us to do. I think that will be your best chance to actually show this man that you mean business. More words, more puffery. He heard that in the first term. And going from 1.6 to 1.7, you know.
Doesn't make much difference.
Hey, thanks, guys. It's been real, it's been fun, but it hasn't been real fun, and it's time to go home.
And finally, I know that you've touched on this before. I wanted to just bring it up again. The way the U.S. is changing across the generations. The younger generation, obviously, is not the same. That's perfectly logical. But this has implications for foreign policy, correct?
Very much so. Is that I remember the Cold War. I remember the Reagan administration. That's when I cast my first vote for president, was for Ronald Reagan in 1980. Much as people older than me remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. You know, people who are 10, 15 years older than me know exactly where they were when John Kennedy was assassinated. That's part of our framework. If you are 50 years or younger, you have only known the American unipolar moment. Your experience and your template is the American failure in Iraq, the American failure in Afghanistan, and European disarmament. And if you are on the right, what you have experienced also is European cultural drift to the point where you feel alien. You feel like Europe doesn't want you anymore. Europe doesn't want somebody who goes to church once a week. Europe doesn't want somebody who looks on the anti-colonialism as being, they look at one of the memes that have taken up on the right is whoever runs Shakespeare's house says that the Shakespeare exhibit needs to be decolonized.
Oh, right.
And it's like, wait a minute, this is the greatest poet that the English language has ever produced. We should be proud of Shakespeare. We shouldn't be embarrassed of Shakespeare. So you look at that and you say, these people don't want me anymore. And on the left, what you have is people who tend to, if they are young, also have the American unipolar moment, tend to think of it as being wrong morally, as opposed to simply wrong or poor, bad from an American interest standpoint, and like all of this. These are the sort of people, if you are on the left and you're under 50 years old, you tend to say, yeah, Shakespeare is a problem. Yeah, we should be, Western civilization is a civilization of colonization and exploitation, and we should be ashamed of it. So on the left, you have people who look and they say, we agree with the European left that force should be a thing of the past. We agree with the European left that we should be open to all cultures and mass migration should be a policy of atonement. And on the right, you look and you say, international involvement has cost American lives, American treasure, and gained us nothing, and the Europeans don't like us. Why should we get involved? You have to deal with this if you want America to continue to be involved in you. And I think that the American right over time is a much more secure guarantee for Europe than the American left, but not if they are offered the same old deal, because the same old deal is a bad deal for modern America.
That's great, Henry. Thank you very much. We're out of time. This is the short version. The long version was actually at our event last night here in Brussels, and we're going to be putting that up online as well. So check it out. Thanks again, Henry.
Well, thank you, Chelsea.